Welcome to Looping Pixels, where we look at the sources behind the world's most fascinating mysteries.
And today, we're looking into something truly mind-bending. What if you went to sleep here and woke up somewhere else entirely, fully convinced you'd just lived a whole other life?
Yeah, we're not just talking about, regular dreams. These are accounts people describe as feeling, well, realer than real.
Absolutely. It forces you to ask questions about your own consciousness, right? We've gathered research looking at this from all angles: psychology, neuroscience, even some pretty out there physics.
Okay, so where do we start? There's this whole recent thing online, right? Reality shifting.
Exactly. It really took off. People intentionally trying to, well, shift into a different reality. Let's take this one case, Kristen.
Kristen. Right. So she found out about this, I think, during the pandemic. And the idea is you sort of write a script first.
Precisely. You script it, you detail the world, the scenario, the rules, who's there, everything you want.
Okay.
So Kristen, she scripted this life in a 19th century British mansion. She lay down, did one of the specific techniques people use. We'll get to those. But she did hers, and she claims she just woke up there in that mansion.
No way.
Yes. Found the exact antique bed she'd imagined, the servants, even a specific butler she'd written into her script.
But, I mean, that could just be a vivid dream, couldn't it? What made it different for her?
The physical feeling. That's what she and many others emphasize. She said she felt actual wind on her face. She felt present, totally convinced.
Wow. Okay.
Heck
That's
yeah.
something else.
And this isn't some fringe thing. The reality shifting hashtag on platforms like TikTok, it got over 300 million views. It's huge. Seriously. And people share these very structured methods for how to do it.
Right. The methods you mentioned. What are they like?
Well, there's the Raven method. That involves lying completely still, spread out.
Like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man.
Exactly like that. And you count down slowly from 100, all while focusing intensely on the reality you scripted.
Okay. Counting down.
Or you have the Alice in Wonderland method, a bit more visual. You imagine chasing someone, maybe a character from your desired reality, down a rabbit hole.
Right, following them into that world.
Now, experts looking at this often compare it to maybe a strong form of self-hypnosis. You're basically creating a very powerful illusion of being somewhere else.
But what's really interesting is what Kristen said afterwards. It wasn't just escapism for her.
No, not at all. She claims she learned things in her 19th century mansion life, like managing staff, diplomacy.
Stuff she could actually use.
Stuff she said she did use in her real life afterwards. So for many, it seems to give this feeling of control over their own story.
Its psychological angle is fascinating, the feeling of agency.
It really is. But okay, let's shift gears a bit. From these intentional attempts to something more spontaneous, out-of-body experiences, or OBEs.
Right, where your consciousness feels like it's literally outside your body.
Exactly. And our sources show that most of these, maybe 3/4, about 74%, happen completely out of the blue. No scripting, no methods, and often they start in childhood.
Spontaneous. That feels different. Less like self-hypnosis, maybe.
Potentially. And people describe these OBEs as incredibly vivid. Often, like the shifters, they say it felt more real, more authentic than everyday reality.
Okay. Any powerful examples?
There's one account from a participant who had an OBE while she was asleep. She described seeing herself in a hospital hallway. She was visiting her aunt who was sick.
In the OBE?
In the OBE, yeah. And she saw specific details, even remembered interacting with a couple of doctors in that hallway scene.
Like a very detailed dream, maybe.
Here's the kicker. The next morning, she actually went to the hospital to visit her aunt. And the hallway. The layout, the details. She said it was, and I quote, identical to what she'd experienced in the OBE. It shook her. She said she started trembling.
Identical. Okay, that's where it gets really weird. That's not just a dream. If the internal experience matches external reality perfectly, how do scientists even start to explain that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really challenges simple explanations.
Does it just completely throw out the idea of it being like dissociation or hypnosis?
Not necessarily throw it out, but it complicates it immensely. We have to acknowledge the brain is an incredible reality builder, but it's also prone to glitches, let's say, or distortions. The intense feeling of reality and shifting and OBEs, it does overlap quite a bit with something called dissociation.
Okay, dissociation. Can you break that down a bit? What does that feel like?
Sure, it's basically a sense of detachment. Two main types you hear about. First is depersonalization, often called DPDR. That's feeling detached from yourself, like you're watching your own life from the outside.
Like watching a movie of yourself.
Kind of, yeah. Then there's derealization, That's when the world around you feels unreal, dreamlike, maybe empty, lifeless, visually strange.
Huh. Is that common?
Actually, yes. Brief episodes are surprisingly common. Some estimates say up to 74% of people might feel something like that at least once in their lives.
Wow. So the brain has this detachment capability built in almost.
It seems so. And that leads us straight to memory, because memory is how the brain builds our sense of continuous reality, our life story.
But memory isn't like a perfect video recording, right?
And incredibly unreliable. The brain hates gaps, you see. It wants a smooth narrative, so it fills in those gaps. Sometimes it creates entirely false memories without you even realizing it. That's called confabulation.
So just inventing stuff to make the story work?
Pretty much. Without any intent to deceive, that's the key. You see extreme cases in, say, people recovering from a traumatic brain injury. They might describe whole conversations, events that just never happened, but they believe them 100%.
Because it feels real to them.
Exactly. It feels completely authentic. But you don't need a brain injury for memory to get messed up. Think about the misinformation effect. Just hearing a suggestion, maybe a snippet of someone else's account, can change your own memory. Suddenly a witness is sure the suspect wore a red hat, even if they initially had no memory of it. It gets woven in.
Right, like memory contamination.
Precisely. And then there's how the brain messes with time itself. This is really counterintuitive. It's called the temporal repetition effect.
Temporal repetition effect. What's that?
Okay, so studies found that if you experience something repeatedly, your brain tends to remember the first time it happened as being further back in the past than it actually was. Repetition actually warps your internal sense of time. It pushes the memory back.
That's mind-boggling.
It is. And if simple repetition can warp time perception like that, imagine the kind of distortion that might happen during something really intense, like a major biological crisis.
Which brings us, I guess, to the most extreme experiences, near-death experiences, NDEs.
Exactly, NDEs. These are usually the most non-voluntary, profound examples. About 10, maybe 20% of people who survive cardiac arrest report having one.
Realer than real.
Consistently, that phrase comes up again and again. But here's the huge puzzle for neurobiology. How can a brain that's shutting down, literally starved of oxygen, suddenly produce this incredibly rich, structured, coherent experience?
Yeah, that seems completely backward. You'd expect noise, confusion, not hyperreality.
That's the paradox. But recent research using EEG monitoring on patients at the end of life has actually captured something remarkable. They're calling them end-of-life electrical surges.
Electrical surges in the dying brain.
Yes. Right around the time of clinical death, they sometimes see this massive surge in brain activity. It reaches levels normally associated with conscious thought, even heightened consciousness.
What kind of activity?
Specifically, they're seeing high-frequency gamma oscillations. Gamma waves are really important. They're linked to complex cognitive functions, binding information together across the brain. Essentially, organized consciousness.
So the brain, maybe as a final act, flares up, creates one last super vivid reality.
It's like the brain's best guess about reality, which some neuroscientists, like Anil Seth, call a kind of controlled hallucination.
Controlled hallucination. Explain that a bit more.
Well, Seth argues our everyday reality isn't just a clear window onto the world. Our brain actively constructs it. It takes ambiguous signals from our senses and combines them with its prior expectations, its internal models, to create the experience we have.
And that construction is based on what helps us survive.
Absolutely. Think about it. A mosquito, an elephant, a human, we all share the same physical space, but our brains construct vastly different realities from the sensory input, focusing on what matters for our survival. Our reality is just our species' most useful interpretation.
Okay, so if our normal reality is already a kind of construction, a best guess.
Then maybe in these extreme states, shifting, OBEs, NDEs, that construction process goes into overdrive or gets accessed differently or maybe even glimpses something else.
Something else, like what the experiencers themselves sometimes lean towards, the more out there ideas.
Right, the quantum stuff, the multiverse. If reality is a construct, could these experiences be, I don't know, bleeding through from other possible realities?
Okay, now we're getting into theoretical physics territory.
Yeah.
The multiverse idea, infinite universes branching off with every possibility.
Yeah, that whole concept. Where maybe there are countless Earths, slightly different histories playing out in parallel.
And how does that connect?
Well, there's a speculative idea, sometimes called quantum dreaming or something similar. It suggests that maybe our consciousness can briefly become entangled with other versions of ourselves, other us's existing in those parallel universes.
And
The idea is these incredibly vivid alternate lives might be like echoes, glimpses into other possibilities across the multiverse.
highly speculative, obviously.
Oh, absolutely. It's way out on the edge, not mainstream science. But for someone who's had one of these profoundly real experiences, you can see why it might offer a framework that feels like it fits the intensity of what they went through.
It tries to make sense of something that feels fundamentally real, but doesn't fit our normal understanding of reality.
Exactly. It addresses that core feeling of, this wasn't just in my head.
Okay, so after looking at all this, reality shifting, where does that leave us? It feels like a spectrum.
I think that's a good way to put it. On one end, you have processes we can kind of explain with current psychology and neuroscience. Things like self-hypnosis, the brain's amazing ability to confabulate, to create vivid narratives, even messing with our sense of time.
Right, the brain filling in gas, constructing things.
Then, moving along the spectrum, you have these intense biological events, like those gamma surges seen during NDEs. Real, measurable brain activity, creating hyper-real experiences.
A biological basis for the realer than real feeling.
And then way out on the far end, you have the speculative physics, the multiverse, quantum echoes trying to frame these experiences within a potentially larger cosmic structure.
So explanations range from the psychological to the cosmological almost.
Pretty much. But the constant thread through all of it, no matter the explanation you lean towards, is just how malleable our perception of reality is.
What feels absolutely solid and real can be, well, surprisingly flexible,
Yeah.
often determined entirely internally.
The brain's just making its best guess, always trying to build a coherent, useful picture for survival.
If our memory is constantly being tweaked and rewritten to make sense of things.
And if the brain, under certain conditions, can generate an experience that feels utterly indistinguishably real, maybe even more real than baseline reality.
But how can we ever be truly certain? Can we definitively distinguish between an alternate life that was somehow genuinely lived or experienced and one that was just flawlessly manufactured by our own minds?
It's a fascinating boundary to think about. Keep exploring.
We hope you enjoyed this look into alternate lives here on Looping Pixels. We'll see you next time.